Senator Bishop, so I'm sure he'll be joining us in a minute, but we have Representative Bart LeBon, we have Senator John Coghill, and Rep. Steve Thompson. So, gentlemen, thank you for being with us today, and I'm going to just turn the floor over to whoever's going to start it.
Seniority.
Is that you?
Seniority. I've been able to say that often.
Well, I hate to start with that quick, but good morning. Interesting times. Interesting times. So we had 7 months to work out a budget, basically, and probably the tension that we had to face this year was not only the political tension of the House organizing and all that, but working with the governor, we didn't exactly know what the priority issues were as he began to lay them out. In fact, Click was on the Finance Committee. I'll let him talk about it a little bit. But in many regards, the people who we had been used to getting the answers on how they're going to do that in their agency, and the people who were actually calling the economic dollar shots were not in sync. And so this was a new system for every legislator. Now, the House had a hard time getting together for a variety of reasons, but they took the first 40 days. So add new governor, that new style, it just took a lot of time to try to figure out how to look at those numbers. It became obvious to us, I'm going to talk at a high level, it became obvious to us that the governor was looking at them just purely as numbers. And it was going to be up to us as legislators to look at how to prioritize them. The governor had some pretty significant support in the legislature, I would say, and he was able to forward much of his agenda. And it put us in a us and them situation, which I guess it's not unusual in the legislature, but the two questions we knew we were going to have to answer, day one, how do we have a sustainable budget, and what do we do with the dividend? and there's still the question today. And so, you know, it's going to be an ongoing discussion. As of yesterday, as you all saw, what he did with his what he calls what I call backing away from some of his vetoes. And doing the $1,600 dividend, it was not changing his position, it was just changing his tactic, basically. And he intends to cut government, I think, with, I'm going to say this carefully, I suppose I'll just blunt it out. I think he has a contempt for government. And there's a difference between having a contempt for government and having a purposefully reduced government. And I think that focus was tough for the legislature to deal with. It just was. So we have to go through each agency and try to figure out how we as the legislature are going to prioritize those agencies to get the work done for the year and move Alaska forward. As you can see, we couldn't override the governor's vetoes, but we at least made a statement saying we think this is a priority. And the governor and the legislature obviously disagree on much of that. For us in Fairbanks area, it's fallen on the Fairbanks legislators primarily to defend the University of Alaska. There are some places where I think they need to change this. I have no doubt about it. But what I think the governor started off to do by just taking the money away and saying, you have to figure it out, was a step too far for most of us. I made a little spiel on the floor that you're going to take one of the larger communities in Alaska and take a third of its economy away. Now, that may be overstating it, but not by much. And so we had to go to bat for the university. And I can tell you, as a conservative guy, some of the stuff that they do up there drives me absolutely crazy. So, but it's a good part, and I still want my dental hygienists and my engineers and my teachers, we want to be able to move along. I think the thing that the governor either underestimated or has no interest in is the value of the research part of the university and its value to the rest of the world as far as our hosting a northern hemisphere area. So anyway, I'll say this. That was kind of one of the big deals to us on the budget, at least for me it was. I guess the other thing that I'll say, and just in general, because these guys can get into the details, the governor wanted to cut government down, but I think many of us wanted to say, how do we preserve the industry or the economic capacity or the how would you say it, commerce capacity, basically, the Chamber of Commerce, right? That means you have to have your roads, your railroads, your airports. You have to have the things, you have to be able to get permits when you need them. You have to be able to get land managed in order so that commerce can grow. And I think that was missing in much of the debate as we talked about the budget. What is the commerce capacity of Alaska to grow with? And how does government fulfill that? The other thing, and I'm going to talk in big pictures here, is whether we like it or not, Alaska has probably easily a third, maybe a little less of the economy is government economy, state, federal, local. And certainly the land ownership is mostly all public. So how do you increase the private part of the economy? You have to have the governance structure to do that, and that's when I talk about the commerce capacity. So those are the lenses, I think, that many of us look at how we do a budget. And this governor had a very, very different point of view, obviously. So this is round one of another 3 rounds, basically. We are going to have to ask those questions again as we go into this next session. He mentioned yesterday in his little spiel that not only was he going to accept the $1,600 dividend, but he was going to go for the statutory $3,000 dividend. So, and that the government cuts are still on the table for him. So that means as he's rolling out his budget in December, and as we look at what can happen between now and then, he at least indicated that he wanted to have another special session. He didn't even hint at it.
No, he said it.
So when, I don't know. It'll have to be, in his view, before the first of the year. So, the legislature at this point is going to have to respond to him. There's no doubt about it. I don't think that he has the support level that he wants to change the dividend to the degree he wants. I think the House has made it very clear that when we get to the $1,600 dividend, the House and the Senate were at different places. The House went up as high as they could to $1,600, and the Senate went as low as they could to $1,600. That was the best we could do. And that's going to be the same story as we go into the next year. So how the governor then begins to push based on that. Now, I'm a Republican, so those of you who aren't can excuse me for this, but how the dividend...
Oh, hi, Adam.
How the dividend...
John and I agree on everything. Very good, very good.
It's amazing to me how the dividend became so sacrosanct that you could literally burn the house down for it. In my Republican ranks. And so I'm just sorry about that. And I'm not going along with it. So just to let you know, that's not gonna be on my list of things to do. However, I think that this generation getting it and not allowing it to go on to the next generation is criminal too. Now, was it a good idea to begin with? Debatable. But should we take it for this generation and destroy it? No. At least the next generation should get a little something out of it. So we've got to figure out a methodology that is rational, that preserves enough for the next generation to get something without turning it into a fundamental right. And so that's going to be the challenge probably of the next year. And unfortunately, it's going to spill over into the political races that we go into next year because I don't see how it's going to get out of it. Anyway, that's John Coggill view. I'll shut up.
Well, okay, so let's go to Clint.
I apologize. I was on the phone with the Senate President when she called, and we're trying to get a meeting tomorrow at 10, and there's been a lot of moving parts with this, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Permanent Fund Working Group, so I apologize for that. So what do you want to know?
You tell us everything you do know.
I just did 3 whole minutes.
Quick
Well,
presentation.
I'll just give you sound bites because we could sit in here and talk till noon.
Right.
But I'll just put it straight up with you. I think it's a travesty what they did with the budget. Now, I'll just sum it up to broad sweeps. When they first rolled the budget out, and just to dovetail on a couple of John's comments, and not debating John at all, you know, the House took 40 days to organize. With that being said, House members were in Senate Finance every day listening to what Senate Finance was doing with the administration, with the budget. So they were up to speed when it came time to fire up their Finance Committee. So, you know what I'm saying? And we did have the budget done by May 17th.
Yeah.
The budget was done.
Balanced.
May 17th. It was hung up on the dividend. So, to say that we didn't do our work, we did our work. We did our work within the 121-day constitutionally mandated session, which I thought was very good. You got to separate, you know, I'm going to get on a roll here, and I don't. You got to separate out candidate Dunleavy, what he said on the trail about the budget, and then what the Governor Dunleavy did as governor. And so I'll just hit some broad sweeps and let these other guys talk, because this is something that just, I get madder than a wet hen about this whole mess that was created for nothing. When I asked the OMB director, and I got quoted in the paper last week by Tim Bradner, last Sunday's editorial, on another topic, but when I asked her, I says, well, how does a $1.6 billion reduction, did a cost-benefit analysis of that, and what the effects are on the state of Alaska? She said, no. I said, okay, second question. Have you talked to the ratings agencies on what this is going to do to the state's credit rating and the municipality's credit rating in the state? Nope, they haven't done that either. So what happened a week ago? Wall Street downgraded Alaska from a positive to a negative. I haven't been to Harvard. I haven't studied Lafleur School of Economics, but I did take one course of economics at Lathrop. And I learned something there. Third question. So how does a $321 million reduction in K-12 improve outcomes? Not my problem. We got to balance the budget. I said, and that's when I pushed back from the table. I said, with all due respect, that's the wrong answer. So then she went on to this song and dance about how the economy's in a recession, and is given this Bravo Sierra answer. And I said, wrong. It's all due to the world price of oil crashing. I said, you got to take this whole state budget back, and the people, I read one website, I read it twice a day, and I study world oil politics, supply, demand every day. When you read that and understand the global supply of oil and where it's going, everybody should study that because we're a one-trick pony. That's the only place we get our revenue. We get a little smattering from here and there, but now it's oil, and thank God that we passed SB 26 and Bill 26, the POMV model last year, because now we've got a renewable source of income there, provided that you don't overspend it. Okay, the formula. So with that being said, and for those that want a $3,000 dividend, then the governor, the question I haven't asked him, but I'm going to throw it out here on this table. Okay, he already told you on June 26th, he's going to cut the budget again another $620 million next year. All right, and it's all. Then I said, okay, and then this is the question I'm going to ask him. So when oil goes to 40 next year, where are you going to get the next 600 on top of the 600 to balance to pay the budget? So I do have 2 revenue bills in. I had some people tell me that support a $3,000 dividend, that they support an income tax, a sales tax. I said, well, good, just draft the bill. I'm the only one that's got 2 revenue bills in the building, not throwing any light on either of my colleagues here. But, and I'm not interested in taxing the oil industry one dime until the people pay something first. Like we used to. The education head tax, the motor fuel tax needs a raise. Now then I'll have a discussion about adjusting the sliding per barrel credit scale. Because you can put a tax on the industry right now that's on the cusp of putting $5 billion in build out in PICA and GMT2, and they're going to say, well, we just pull our horns back in. And you're going to sit there and watch your under 500,000, right at 500,000 barrel a day production just go whoosh, right down the tubes. My point is, I'm trying to get a balance, head off any big taxes this way, and save the state at the same time. So I'm done. I mean, I can talk for hours, but this is stupid. I'll just tell you that it is stupid, and it's sad. It is sad, in my opinion. So I know there'll be people that disagree with it, but I've been there. This is the last thing I want to say. This for now. I've been there for 2 administrations as a commissioner, worked for 2 different governors. We sat down with the governor at the head of the table, full cabinet, OMB director, and we looked at vetoes as a cabinet. We defended or advocated for or agreed with the veto. The governor or the commissioner, where that cut would be in his lane or her lane, would make the call to the sitting senator and say, sorry, but we're going down this road, we're going to make a reduction. We didn't read about it in the newspaper. I can tell you, you can go look at the reductions, and you can look at the add backs in here, and you can draw a correlation of who went to Wasilla as a lawmaker and who went to Juneau. So, and I said that to Ben Stevens verbatim yesterday. Thank you.
Okay, Steve.
Why don't we go to the finance person from the House?
I didn't want to follow that.
My thought is we go now by
Sure.
seniority, if that works for you.
Sure.
And I think
for me.
You're
You're
I know you're not the oldest, but you've been how long?
Been there a few years. Yeah, this has been one of the most difficult years since I've been down here. It's just crazy to see what has happened and the reaction from everybody in the state. The amount of people that have already left, that have put their houses up for sale, the scientists up at the university that have already taken another job because that grant that they get for their research is going with them also. I mean, that's the thing that gets me. That's why, like was said, the Interior Delegation has been the biggest backers of the university system, and it means so much. It means not only to Fairbanks, but to the state and to, a lot of it, to the world. I got emails from Denmark, from Holland, from Algeria. These are people that are scientists that said, hey, you guys can't cut this out of that university because this means something to the world. I work with your people up there in Fairbanks at the university on their research. And it's something to me that it's bigger than Alaska, really. And the way that this was done from the start was devastating. I mean, it just couldn't happen. Now they've got their 3-year plan, which was interesting because, you know, we had forward-funded education K-12 last year, and he kept saying that's illegal, and you got the Attorney General involved, and we've been around and around with this, and they were trying to get a legal opinion that would stop it all from happening. We sued the governor over it. We're moving forward because he said it was illegal to forward fund. Yet he comes out now with this deal where, okay, there's going to be a $302,000 state funding for the university this year, $277 million it is next year, and $257 the year after. Well, he's forward funding 3 years of the university all of a sudden, and it's illegal, he said. So that was kind of complicated. What it amounted to was that he's going to veto it down to those amounts, but at the same time, he came out and said the dollars. So that was kind of devastating. Some of his stuff that he's got in here that he just did, some of it, you know, I just don't understand where he's making progress or how it's going to totally affect the state. There are just too many things there. You know, DOT has came back and told us, you know, when we sat down and added $5 million back to the ferry system. They said, we're going to have one ferry for 6 months going into Cordova. Well, this $5 million would give them better service and have more regular service into Cordova. There were some people in Cordova, one of them has got a medical problem, and they're not allowed to fly. So they've got to take the ferry. All the goods go in and out of Cordova on the ferry. And what are we going to do to that community? I mean, those are the types of things that we looked at, but the governor did not look at. Governor's people have to. And it's kind of scary to see a lot of these things, how they're going to impact statewide. I mean, it's just amazing. We don't have enough votes to override the vetoes. The House minority has put out their statements now that, well, we worked with the governor and we got him to put these things back in, such as street lights on Jewel Lake Road going to the school. That was Sarah Rasmussen's big point. Oh, he put that in there because now he's got her where she will not do any veto overrides.
But Clint's kids can't have any drinking water at Chalkeetsik, though, so.
That's right, they did away with that project. You know, anything that we had, they made sure they didn't put in, but he bought the votes. He took them into his office. The minority sat down with him more than one time, and they went through and decided what they wanted, and he's got their votes because of it. So we are not going to be able to do any overrides on this, which is amazing. Some of them, instead of doing partials, he went through and took a meat cleaver to the whole damn thing. So it's kind of frustrating. And again, it was brought up again about the dividend. I've never seen anything in my life that has divided a state more than the permanent fund dividend. It's got people fighting. I mean, they are just at each other's throats about this dividend. And it's just unfortunate that we've created that big of a problem. Hammond in 1979 sent a letter to Clem Tillon, the President of the Senate, and said, here's how I see that we should be spending the earnings off of that permanent fund. 50% of the earnings should go to operate government. 25% should go to capital projects, deferred maintenance. We're $2 billion behind on deferred maintenance and putting no money into it. And the last 25% should go to the people as their portion as a dividend. That would be a workable solution, in my opinion. That's what we should have done from the very start. But Clem Tillon wanted the big one out there, so the Senate got it. They put it in as a 50-50 split, period. But yeah, we're gonna have the next couple of years are gonna be really tough because, like you said, this was the first of the 3-year calm down. And what's the state gonna look like? Who's gonna be here? How are we gonna be able to maintain our necessary services that people expect.
Seems to me, Steve, you need to put something in there to change the water system in Wasilla. Water down there.
Yeah. And again, you know, him coming out with the university stuff, we're the appropriating body. There's a separation of powers here that just doesn't seem to fit. There's too much of this going on where, yeah, this is gonna be a scary couple of more years.
There's no question, right? Just pontificate.
Yeah. Well, there'll be questions.
Okay, good.
By the way, tell him your plan for the permanent fund.
I do have a formula.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll lead with that, but, yeah, the permanent fund, I think it's all about the permanent fund to some degree or another, because it's the largest budget item that we have. And whenever people talk about cutting the budget, all of us at the table want to cut the permanent fund, and there's a group of other people that don't, and all you need is 16 of them to prevent anything from really happening. SB 26 passed last year, thankfully, and that too was a vote that was sort of bipartisan in nature. Democrats voted for it, Democrats voted against it, Republicans voted for it, Republicans voted against it, and I think the dividend falls in line with that. That SB 26 and anything we do with the dividend and the formula are sort of two sides of the same coin. And what we didn't do with SB 26, which I thought there was some language originally to,
25%.
was to repeal there was a repeal language to take away the formula, I thought.
Right.
And if that had stayed in there, even if we didn't have a new formula, we wouldn't have this old formula hanging over us like Damocles' sword. And every time we want to change the amount, people say, well, we're not following the statute, which we're not. But we haven't followed it in years, and we've decided as a governing body for several years. Started off with Governor Walker vetoing half the PFD, which also didn't get an override vote, and then the legislature for the next couple of years after that voted for a reduced PFD of 1,100 and then 1,600, and now we're at 1,600. And as Senator Coghill pointed out, that was the low water mark for the Senate and the high water mark for the House, which maybe that's a good way that we compromised. I don't know what's going to happen when Senator Birch's seat is replaced, because the Senate is very, very close right now. And although the House took 40 days or so to organize at the front end, the Senate has had some organization. They haven't reorganized, but there's some coalitions forming in the Senate, as was evidenced with the 11-9 vote to not have a $3,000 PFD. And like I said, Democrats are voting for $3,000, and in the Senate and in the House, and so it's not really a party issue. And I think it has to be dealt with. I mean, it just has to be dealt with. And maybe there'll be a special session this year that we go deal with the PFD. I don't know. I don't know how easy it's going to be to come up with a new formula, but that's sort of something we have to. That's something we have to do. Senator Coghill also mentioned the next generation not being deprived of a permanent fund dividend, which I agree with. But I also think the next generation shouldn't be deprived of a quality education, both in K-12 or at the university. And I think if the university, and you can say what you want about inefficiencies or too much administration or overspending for a decade or two, and that may all be true, but they have sustained a bunch of cuts over the last 5 years, with the exception of last year. They've been cut about $50 million, and they felt that, and enrollment is down, and the professors and grants that are leaving, which has been accelerated recently, has been going on for a little while now. Enrollment is down at colleges and universities all over the country. It's not just UAF. And also, state funding for state universities has been going down, although some states are now reversing that because they realize it was a bad move. As far as Donna Arduin and her influence on the governor, it's not too difficult to see what she's done in other states, and this sort of adherence to a philosophy of cutting government for for the sake of cutting government, I think is what she's been doing. And if you look at Kansas and California and Florida and all the other states where she's been, this has been happening. It's a philosophy, I guess, or ideology, and they're trying it here, and there's been pushback, and thankfully so, because people realize they want services. And in other states, they use taxes as we're going to lower taxes, like in Kansas, and cut government. And in here, we don't really have taxes, and so we're going to increase the PFD and cut government. So it's sort of more money in your pocket. They're sort of buying access to this ideology. So if by raising your PFD, you'll vote for them and you'll save money, and it will be a good thing, and will reduce government, and that will help the economy somehow, and private sector will do well. And I'm a big supporter of private sector, and I've been involved in private sector most of my adult life. And but I think 68%, no, what's the percentage of government workers in Fairbanks? It's high. It's around 60 or more, whether federal, local, or state, and that includes the military, of course. But and Alaska, I think, is the 5th largest state in the country as far as how much federal money we get per capita when you reduce how much we pay out to the Fed. So we get a lot of federal money. There's a lot. This is a government state, and this is a government town. So to say we got to cut government to help our economy or to help the private sector, I think is misleading and incorrect. So I don't believe in waste or mismanagement either, but I think we have to realize what we are. And you know, if you cut a bunch of government jobs like teachers and researchers and first responders, these are all government jobs. If you cut a bunch of those, not only are people's lives quality of life is going to change, we're also going to feel it in the small businesses. They won't be borrowing money from the banks, or they won't be buying cars at Seekins, or you know, shopping and spending money. So that will affect the economy as a whole, as I'm sure you know. So I think as far as the budget cuts, there's a couple that stand out for me amongst the many, but the Cold Climate Housing Research Center, I think, is a shame to cut that down to zero. That doesn't help anybody. It's $750,000, and I don't know how much those lights cost in Jewel Lake Road, but and the earthquake array monitors, which was another thing that was kind of a good deal. That the National Science Foundation put in all these monitors across the country, and the ones in Alaska they're done with, and they were going to take them away, and we said, no, we'll buy them. They're already installed. We get them at a good price, and we can use them not just for earthquake, but for other kinds of data and temperature and all this other stuff, and other people will pay to come here and use that data and to use our resources. It's a growth industry. Climate research, science research, it's something that we do. Whether you think it's good or not, it's one of our industries, just like mining or whatever else. So I think not purchasing those was a mistake. Again, it was a low investment for, I think, a high yield into the future. So those are two that stuck out with me. As far as the dividend goes, I do think we need a new formula. I personally don't think it should just be a percentage of the POMV. The POMV, thankfully we passed SB 26. If we did 50% of POMV, which was bantied around in the Senate, that would be a $2,000 check. However, in 10 years, that would be back up to $3,000 or so, as depending on what the stock market does. But it's not going to go. It's going to trend upwards, where the other part of our revenue is oil. So if we have two components to revenue, which is POMV and oil, and let's say oil goes down, but we're still committed to paying out a $2,000 or $3,000 check in the next 10 years, we're right back where we started. So I think we have to look at it a little more creatively and not just say, well, we're going to take a chunk of our guaranteed income and pay it out so that people have guaranteed income, because I don't think the permanent fund was ever set up as guaranteed income. And at $3,000, if you have a family of 4 kids and 2 adults, that's almost $20,000. That's serious money, and that's why people are so worked up about it. When it's $300, people weren't so emotional about it. So I think that's the problem, and I hope we can It's a big problem, and it's been years now, since 2014 or 2015, when the price of oil crashed, that people are saying, wait a minute, we gotta really look at this. And also, at the same time, when the crash of '08 hit, we had 5 years of averaging. So when 2014 hit, the permanent fund went up, because that low year of '08 had finally run its 5-year cycle. So you had two things going on, the budget crash and the PFD went up, and that's what inflamed this whole situation. So I think we really have to deal with it, and I'm certainly not afraid to take those kind of votes.
Mark?
What a year to be a freshman. I was able, through the political process, when we finally organized, to secure a seat on finance, and I'm happy that Adam now is also on the finance committee. When Representative Wilson left the group after going to Wasilla, I was deeply concerned, Stephen, Adam can tell you, that I would be the only interior representative on finance, but I was happy that Representative Wool secured that vacant seat. I won't go into a long dissertation because people probably have questions for the group, but I'll just suffice to say that the PFD, yes, that is so important to so many people. I was out riding my bicycle last night, and a gentleman stopped me on the street and wanted to talk about the PFD and why I cut it to $1,600. So 10 minutes later, I was back on my bike motoring on. A lot of folks just don't remember that vote in 1976 and how that vote was cast. I made a speech on the floor about the history of the permanent fund and what its purpose was back in 1976. And in my thinking, that hasn't changed. I'll just end this by just saying the university is high on my priority list. I make no secret that I'm closely attached to the university, both as a graduate and a longtime supporter. And just to remind the group, too, that that $1,600 in the PFD this year is partially funded by the Statutory Budget Reserve Fund, which is now going to be at zero. So next year, funding the PFD at $1,600 is going to be a big challenge. So be ready for it to be significantly lower than that amount. And as been mentioned, to override vetoes, it's not likely to happen. So when three of us on finance, click on Senate Finance, and Adam and I on the House Finance, start to craft a budget, it's going to look very much similar to what I think we crafted this year, and that PFD for the House is going to be the fill number, I believe. We'll fill the budget with the PFD amount, and it's not going to be $1,600. I don't think it can be. As far as additional cuts from the governor's office, we can anticipate those. A lot more drama to play out, and with that, I guess we turn it over for questions, so we have time for that.
Sure. I'd say just a couple things. Despite these cuts, and I had a new senator sitting beside me my first year, and that person was so excited we were going to cut, I don't know, we think we cut $300 million. And I whispered to him, I said, wait till we come back in January and you see the supplemental and you'll see what we really cut.
Yeah.
Right? So inside this budget here, there's a probably 50 to 100 million range on Medicaid that's contingent upon what's called an 1155 waiver from the federal government, which has never been granted to any other state in the union. So hold on, probably going to have supplemental on Medicaid, right? Second thing is I don't have to tell you about the fires because I have DNR's budget. 2 weeks ago, the supplemental for fires projected was $50 million before what kicked off down there in South Central. Okay, hold that thought. Then we passed a crime bill. It's got fiscal notes north of 50, right? So pretty soon this $220 million cut that the House and the Senate agreed upon next January it could be gone. My point is, I think we've damn near hit the sweet spot on the budget as far as cutting it. And the administration campaigned on, the governor campaigned on growing government, right, at the rate of inflation. 2%. So that's $80 million a year on this budget. Anyway, I'm done. I mean, I just wanted to point that out. Supplementals that are going to come back. I think you've hit the sweet spot. There's some nibbling around the edges.
Probably the other thing to take into account is when he was talking about his cuts, he's talking about what they call all state funds. And so there's a general fund and designated funds. Designated general funds. And that is when you pay for your services, the mining companies, when they pay for their services, that's now on the chopping block.
Well, the Ocean Ranger program is totally funded by fees on the cruise ships. The Ocean Ranger program is who monitors what's going on those cruise ships and their discharges. No state money's involved in that, but he cut it.
Right, so
That makes sense.
when you hear the
That's
word
cut here,
designated
isn't it?
general fund, it's, you're paying for a service. So now he's saying, we're probably not gonna deliver that service even if you're willing to pay for it. So those are the kind of things that we're gonna have to deal with, as we come into the next go-around.
Okay, let's go to questions, and if you have a question that's directed specifically to one of the legislatures, go ahead and say who it is. If not, just the general question is fine.
I guess the general one, I guess, is with the numbers being so critical down there with the sides that are drawn and the line in the sand and everything, Chris Birch's leaving has been a devastation. I think people don't realize, with his roots in Fairbanks and his history and his philosophy, his statesmanship, how comfortable, well, my question is this, how comfortable are you guys with his replacement having a similar psyche? Does that make sense? And does I don't know the process, I'm always surprised at the things going on down there, that who actually is going to be having the, pushing that button to do that.
You want to start?
I'll start. First of all, I got appointed, when Gene Terrio left the Senate, I got appointed from the House, and the two districts, that are involved, get to, have input. So they are now, they have 6 names. They have to whittle it down to 3 names to send to the governor. So the governor gets a choice, the districts get a choice, and there are 6 people who are vying for that. So we're watching, but we're not in control. Now, we could say yes or no because we have the right as a Republican body to say yes or no, but our Republican body is split right down the middle. So whatever the governor gets probably is going to happen. And that's going to be, it'll be a tension, there's no doubt about it. So I was glad to see his daughter put her name in, but Donnelly is a weathered legislator, and the other 2 are in the House, so it's
Did Revac put his name in?
I think Revac put his name in.
Revac.
And so the question's going to be, what will it do to the House? What will it do to the Senate? There's an uncertainty that we don't, any one of us know anything about. Sorry, but yeah, it's going to be a big deal.
Gene?
I couldn't be more happy with my replacement. Thank you, John, for your action. Thank you all for actually acting as an independent branch of government. It's interesting to me when you hear the name Clem Tilly, then, well, what does Clem think you should do, or what does Clem think you're obligated to do? What does Gene Terrio think you're obligated to do? Either Clem or Gene Terrio are in the legislature.
Right.
You're the legislature now. And with regard to, the appropriation and whether you're appropriately following the law, I think all of you understand, but this argument that, well, who do they think they are to ignore the law? It's based on a misunderstanding of the power of government separation. Your power of appropriation trumps everything. No statute can direct what you put into a budget or not. That is the main power of the legislature. And to think that a previous legislature somehow obligated you or restricted your use of that power is just completely false. So please
cascading effect, Jane. The governor, in his vetoes, actually overrode many laws. When we do a budget, we override other laws. And so we're not law breakers. We are making policy calls that may trump a previous policy call.
Exactly.
So,
And the previous legislature, legislators sitting in office 30 years ago, how could they imagine what the economy would be doing right now?
yeah.
That's why that power is reserved to you. Just on the little thing that I lobbied on this year, the funding for the community matching grant, thank you all for supporting that. I don't think that there was a real understanding in the administration that that system was set up by the legislature to spread some money to large municipalities to meet what the legislature determined were constitutional obligations. And so I'm wondering if any of you interacting with the administration got a feeling that their understanding of that program, its constitutional basis, they have a better understanding, or are we going to be facing an absolute implementation of that money again for the food bank, and all that it does in the community, 9 cents per meal is the state funding. Pretty good investment.
I've sat on the budget committee that's been involved in, and I don't think there's a constitutional understanding of it. It's just that they began to see that their dollar gets doubled, tripled. The thing is that the Mat-Su, Anchorage, and Fairbanks all have different programs. And so sometimes our very good program gets judged on how these other programs are doing. And so it's not really a constitutional issue, it's a pragmatic issue. But we have done so well here in the interior that I think we probably carried that. It is also true that Mat-Su is kind of getting their feet under them, and obviously the Mat-Su delegation had some significant interest in it. I think it got saved on a political thing, not on a pragmatic thing.
On the food bank, it's surprising how that the food banks around the state work together. I've worked up at the food bank and boxed packages that were going to be mailed out. And here we were putting labels on them. They were going to areas out of Juneau, around southeast. And I said, well, really? We do that? And they said, yeah, but the food bank in Juneau pays us to do this because they don't have any way to do it. So there is an interaction between all the food banks in the state. They aren't all independently just separated from each other.
Yeah, first of all, I really appreciate this. This is an extraordinary thing that I'm seeing here, because you guys get to put your values on the table, because that's what I think we're seeing. You've been stressed so much, we get to see who you really are. And I really like that. You've really done well for the community. I just want to credit you enormously, because I've been watching this. I'm a very big student of this whole process, and the way you handle the permanent fund and the dividend, it's been really great to watch. I do want to ask about item number 71, the earnings reserve transfer to the corporate. It has been restored?
Nope,
No.
he cut it.
He cut it.
Mhm.
Okay, well, so, can you comment on that?
I'll give you my 2 cents. If the more we can shove into the corpus inside the Constitution, that just takes less leverage away from him to browbeat us over a $3,000 dividend. See what I'm saying? Because it puts it inside the Constitution, that's a vote of the people to touch that.
The other thing that's scary, go ahead.
But I just want to go back on that. The Permanent Fund Board, about 30 years ago when Elmer Rasmussen was chair, that board recommended then that we sweep the ERA, collapse it into the corpus, right, and do the 5% of market value draw then. And that's what we're trying to do, we've proved we can walk through $12 billion, right? We've proved that. And not raise taxes, right? Oil's going to save us. Well, that ship sailed. It hasn't. And what we're trying to do is eliminate spending the $19 billion in the ERA, you know what I mean, and being in the same scenario. And so, anyway,
So just, that money can be reached with a vote of 21 or 11. And the scary thing about it is, what he was just saying, we could march through that money while we're trying to figure it out. We are trying to hold as firm as we can on the percent of market value, which is an endowment model, which, if that cash is off the table, then you have to live with that 5%, or at actually 4 3/4, I think, is going to go.
The background of this is that I'm worried that the worst issue I've ever seen come out of the legislature was the idea to put the permanent fund into the Constitution, permanent fund dividend into the Constitution.
I don't
Is
support
that
it.
dead, or is that still out there hanging?
Still out
I
there.
think that would be.
I think the governor's gonna call us back to Juneau, governor's gonna call us back to Juneau to try to get a $3,000 PFD, and he wants that put in to the vote of the people to put it in the Constitution. Those are the two things he's gonna call us back on.
And I think many of us are willing to say no at whatever cost that is going to be.
This is what blows my mind on that constitutional amendment on putting the dividend fund, that dividend in the Constitution. Especially, I shouldn't say it, but as Republicans, right? I'm a defined benefit recipient, right? 44 years operating engineers. I got 2 defined benefit pensions. But my trust manages that fund excellent. Okay? So, but the state in 2006, right, the legislature said, oh, we can't afford that anymore because we got this liability over here, right? Unfunded liability for the state employees. But yet this administration wants to lead with putting it inside the Constitution, creating the biggest defined benefit plan in state's history, and we haven't even paid for the unfunded liability on the last one. So anyway, there's my 2 cents.
Okay, I had a brief question about what's the future of the capital budget? You alluded to it.
Yeah.
As a strong maintenance guy,
Mhm.
the rats are gnawing at the columns. I mean, we got trouble coming,
Sure.
and there isn't much attention. So, if we're gonna spend it all on the PFD, the house will fall down. I just,
One of the fears I have, and you hear this said on the House floor, I don't know about the Senate floor, is that this is a mantra that's going around. Well, we can afford a $3,000 PFD. We just have to get more money out of oil or income tax. We just have to do more taxes. So we can have all our services, and we can have a full PFD. We can have our cake and we can eat it too. What I don't like that, first of all. I don't think we should enable a large PFD simply because we can extract more money out of other industries or individuals. And if we do decide to tax oil or individuals more in the future, I'd like to see that go to capital and infrastructure and things that benefit everybody. Not that the CFD doesn't benefit everyone, but people aren't funding together to fix the road. So I worry that this whole thing about we can do both is going to win the day, and I definitely don't want that to happen. So capital, I would like, if there's any more revenue coming in, if oil should go up or if something should change and the budget stays the same and there's more revenue, I'd like to put it in SBR or in capital, or to not give people big
You know,
checks.
traditionally, every time we've ever had an influx of money with an increase in oil price or whatever, we have put money into the capital budget to take care of deferred maintenance. But then we got all these people out there that are showing that, well, you increased the budget by $500 million. Yeah, it was trying to catch up on deferred maintenance. I mean, that's where we catch hell, is because we increased the budget. Well, we're trying to take care of something that needed to be taken care of, and that's where we are getting hell today. I mean, we actually have reduced the budget by $2 or $3 billion over the last 5 years, but it was because of capital going away. The capital budget's where the majority of that hit.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those legislators that are concerned about not going after the oil companies at this stage of the game. And I think that's very important. Our lifeblood depends upon getting oil in that pipeline. And we don't want to do anything to discourage the development of those oil fields that are up there. Because without the revenues coming from the oil, this state is in real serious trouble. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Jomo.
maybe a little nuanced, but when I testified for FEDC, we didn't take a position necessarily on a dollar value for the PFD, but the funding source of that PFD. By that, what I mean is, we advocated not violating the maximum sustainable draw on ERA, on earnings of the permanent fund. Again, if you guys are gonna be going back down for another run in the permanent fund, what are your thoughts on that? Is that too nuanced? But again, it wasn't so much the dollar value. It could be whatever it was, as long as you didn't violate a restriction you placed on yourself that might get us sideways with the financial markets in the same way that we ended up putting the university in straits, perception of the markets.
I think the only way that's gonna come to be is that the governor, we talked to him early on, back before everything went to hell, about trying to change the formula for the permanent fund dividend. And so we were at the $1,600, and we said, hey, we could consider additional $1,400 paid out the first of next year if we have a change in the formula, and we write the change. And he's not too much in favor of that, but that could be what he uses to entice this additional $1,400. But it would have to be something that we would agree to on the change in the formula.
He also said, if there is a change in the formula, he wants it to go to the vote of the people.
Yeah.
Which complicates the matter.
Right.
And back to the percent of market draw, the 5.25%, I think that's something that we cannot, for me, I don't want to break that rule at all. And when they start talking $3,000 PFD, that's the only place it can come from. That's the only place it can come from.
So it'll break the, and that'll break the law.
About 1.6 billion.
So you could use that, but it would be about a one-shot deal.
You have to have at least a little operating shock absorber because of fire. You have to have cash flow.
Yeah.
And that cash flow is what you use until you can pass a supplemental and authorize it. So that is probably at the bottom right now. So you're not going to use any more of that. So the SBR and the CBR are both, I'd say at this point, not usable because you have to have enough cash on hand for earthquake, for a fire, for road stoppage, or
$50 million we had in the
right.
Yeah.
Or if you have, God forbid, any other tragedy, you've got to be able to have cash flow. And we use that in our Medicaid world. We have an open entitlement that says you get this. If you show up and you qualify, you get this. And that, we only guess at it when we're budgeting. And like Click said, we're now guessing based on something the feds can do. And that means we have a big flex point in our Medicaid world, which is unknowable at this point. And the bill comes due in January, but the bills get paid by the CBR. That's one of the reasons why the CBR was such a big vote getter this year, because not only did it continually fund those things, but it had the sweep provision that allowed us to keep other funds available to the government. That was just another conundrum we had to deal with the last year.
Jomo, you talked about, so we had a $250 million cushion built in the CBR over the course of the legislative years. He vetoed that too.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm telling you, they're going to be, I don't know how this is going to work out. We might have to come back for another, and LB&A can't do that. We can accept federal funds during a non-session, but there's a chance we're going to have to come back and maybe have another vote to bail us out when we run short of cash, because we put the buffer in there for these emergencies. He took it out. I'll give you another one.
In the past, it used to be $500 million we put in there as a buffer to cover the fires that are going on, the earthquake damage, and things like that also.
Natural
So
disasters.
and we put it in at 250 by reducing it, and then he vetoed that.
So then here's the other one that I have yet to talk to Angela Rodell on. He vetoed the management fee money out of the permanent fund corporation, that they pay the investors that make us all the money. So how damn smart is that?
Let's get Rick here. Rick.
Well, first, I thought they had control.
Hey, let me
They
get
don't have
somebody else here.
control of that?
Wait a minute. Rick.
First, thank you for being here today, and more than that, thank you for devoting your lives for the last many months to the betterment of our state and our town, and it comes at some great cost. So thank you for that. I associate myself with much of what you said. But I also look around this room and I realize that we represent a lot of the same opinions, and I'm wondering about how we are going to try to advance discussions and progress and ultimately solutions when our rooms are filled with kind of homogeneous, that's a bad word, that's not the right word, with folks that have a same opinion. I think that what I see is such a polar divide that in the people that it's hard for the legislature to build the bridge, to bring you together. And so I'm wondering if you have suggestions for us as communities to begin to reach out, because until we talk to one another, we don't understand, and we assign bad motives when there may be just a different perspective. And less money on government is not a bad perspective. More efficient operations is not a bad perspective. Devastating our communities, that's a bad, right? But so I think this is progress, a $1,600 dividend and fewer vetoes, and we should decide how we're going to advance towards a better plan than this, as opposed to don't think that we made some progress. And I want to be part of the group that's going to advance the ball, and I want to thank you guys for helping us. And I know this is cathartic for you to be here today, and so I'm understanding that those feelings. But how can we help you? And I almost think it's like we got to go take a delegation to Wasilla. Maybe that's what we got to do, Marissa, with our Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
I'm only half joking, guys.
We went there, House Finance went there.
I got to go there twice.
You went there twice.
But you didn't go there when the governor asked to do. Not that I want to delve into that discussion. I'm just saying, we've got to start talking as towns. And Mike's here, and he would offer the same thoughts with regard to air quality. You know, if we're going to solve this air quality problem with wood smoke, we got to start talking with one another and understanding, as opposed to expecting the government to solve our problems. So I'm sort of speaking, Jim, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're really not asking a question.
I was trying to figure out what my question was going to be, but
I'm afraid that is a question.
no, I'm wanting you guys to
So
ask me how to help you.
I can explain a little bit of the context. The House and the Senate both tried to work with the governor, and they finally ended up having to figure out what they could do to compromise with each other, and then send it to the governor, because the governor said, let's negotiate, do it my way. And so that was part of the issue, is how do you deal with a situation like that? And even these vetoes show that that was the difficult thing. As far as motives goes, I can tell you with the permanent fund dividend, I have lost friends over this, because they assign a motive to me and then beat me up for the motive. So they don't even know what my motive was. They just assign one. So my motive for what I did, and I can't speak for anybody else's, is looking beyond my election into the future of Alaska, for what's the best thing for Alaska. That motive has not been able to break through with many of my friends, I can tell you that. So that's going to be part of the problem, how to keep doing that. And an election cycle helps you do that, and that's what we're going to come up with this time next year. We're going to be right in the middle of it. Why you explain your motives. What you can do to help us, you already have in many, many ways. You all showed up to voice your opinions on the variety of different things. I appreciated the community talking to the administrator yesterday on just the air quality issue. This has been probably one of the more engaged times in Alaska's history. All I could say is if you could help keep the personal attacks to the minimum, that's probably the best you can do to help us.
I'd like to just say that, you know, and I've said it I've been saying it through the last 3 or 4 years. This state budget didn't get to where it is in 1 year. It took 60 years, right? And we can and people can denigrate the university on da-da-da. It's like I said up there off the cuff remarks that I didn't go there to speak, was asked to speak, is that university didn't get that money by themselves. They didn't write the check. The legislature appropriated the money. And they were responding to 2 governors' calls to grow and build our own workforce, to cut and hire Alaskan kids to lessen the non-resident hire in the state and to meet the aging workforce needs. So you got to have an administration that wants to lead. But you can't break it so bad that you don't know what's broke. You got to systemically go in there and make make 3 big policy changes at once. Attack that so we can focus on the 3 policy changes at a time. You can't do this all in 1 year because this is what you wind up with. You don't know what to fix first because it's all broke.
Other questions?
But I just, on Rick's point, I mean, I understand there's going to be different views, and we certainly heard them all. And at the end of the day, we can't please everybody, obviously. And we've get thousands of emails, and we've heard from thousands of people, both in present and otherwise. And at the end of the day, we have to make decisions based on what we think is best. And you know, whether we go to Wasilla or not for a special session, whether someone's going to negotiate in good spirit. I mean, as far as the university deal, the multiple year thing, in a way, I think that was, even though the appropriation aspect of it may not be accurate, but as opposed to cutting $130 million in 1 year, the university says we can't do that. We have to over time, give us time. So he kind of said, okay, we'll give you 3 years. In one perspective, that's a great plan. It's better to do 3-year cuts of smaller than one big one. Does he have the legal authority to make us do it? No. And I don't think anyone thinks he does. And I think whatever handshake deal him and John Davies signed, and I think it's a good faith, and maybe next year the regents will ask for that amount. They haven't even voted on it, on that agreement. So who knows if they're going to agree to it. But I think it shows good faith to some extent. I don't want to see the university cut for multiple years in a row. Me personally, I think that, I think they need to rebuild and make the place attractive to Alaskans, because I'm worried more and more good, smart Alaskan kids aren't going to have that on their list as a place to go, because it's going to drop down low enough. They're going, you know what? I'm going to spend more money and go outside, and that means they probably will stay outside, most of them.
80% of them.
Yes. So I think it's imperative that we make that university to a certain level that attracts our best and brightest that want to stay in Alaska. So, anyhow.
Closing comments for everybody? Okay.
Now that I'm in this lineup here, it's a little bit of an awkward space to be sitting in. I had a couple comments, but also speaking to Rick and what you spoke to as well, is that there may be some level of homogeneity in this room, only because it is Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation and it's 8 in the morning. Well, now 9. But there is, I would say that you and I are often not on the same page. And so I think that there is some diversity within this room, but as Adam spoke, there have been a lot of people speaking out. And I think that there are some who are really strongly hit by the budget cuts and may not be able to speak out just because of their situation, such as those who are homeless, or others that are less able to send emails or to attend meetings. But I think having gone to some of these meetings and, waiting for 2.5 hours, and I was only number 170, people are speaking out, and I think that and a diversity, and I would assume that there's a diversity of opinions that you're hearing and some degree of homogeneity as well. But I also had a question, I think, about I don't know if you can predict what this governor's going to do, but I think it's kind of interesting that he's walking back now on some of the vetoes, and there are some really, I'm pretty passionate, as many of us are, about some of the things that have been cut, like CCHRC and the weatherization program and anyway, but, and some others, but what is the possibility of some of these other vetoes, the recent and some other capital budget vetoes being walked back?
Capital zero.
Okay.
This here is still open for conversation on overrides, but the capital's done.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's get, anybody online have a question? And let's, go ahead.
A couple of things that I'm gonna challenge the perception that the governor is not aware of the value of this research at the university. I'm gonna challenge it because, as the Board of Regents meeting explicitly articulated, he was aware of the value. And you combine that with the strategy to reduce the state funding and force the university to accept private and equity-based investment, which then puts them in a position to research the message coming out of the university, which happens to be the largest voice of Arctic policy in the world. Like, partner that with Don Hardman's track record and the ideology, and you look closely at his confidence in putting things out for a public vote, given the tools that have been implemented to influence voter perception. And I think it's pretty clear that we're dealing with a much larger overarching issue that's much bigger than what you guys can individually manage through the legislature with the PFC competition. The PFC is the two crabs in the pot.
Good question there.
So the question is, what other tools does the legislature have at its disposal that can address potentially some of these overarching greater issues? Understanding you are one leg of the government. And you don't have to answer that to me, it's a rhetorical question. What other tools do you have at your disposal, whether partnerships, whether strategies, whether angles, and actually address it for what it is, and not just the conversation that has got everybody looked up in consuming things?
Let me take a quick shot at this. The legislature is made up of 60. It's made up of 40 and 20. They're from all over Alaska. They bring the policy needs and the economic needs to their government. They're one branch of three branches. They get to have what is now considered a messy voice, but it's a necessary part of the structure. They have three major powers. They can appropriate, they can legislate, and they can convene. That's really all they have. The governor has much more authority from our Constitution than the legislature does. We have those three primarily. Our convening is part of our voice. You can take a committee and bring people in to bring their voices on specific topics. But it's harder for the legislature to have a single voice because they're a blended voice of 60 different people from all over Alaska with very, very different views that have to blend them together. But they do it, and they do it through compromise, and they do it through bringing the voices of Fairbanks and the voices of Anchorage and Kotzebue to Juneau or to the place of policy making. They also have the power of appropriation, which is probably the only power that they share in a significant way with the governor. The governor proposes and we dispose, basically. And we can propose and dispose. And so we share that power. That is the biggest tension power in Alaska right now that has an immediate effect and a long-term effect. Getting legislators to see the long-term effect is going to be a big part of how Alaskans move this thing forward. The governor is supposed to cast a vision. Now, he has cast a vision that is a mixed vision right now, because right now it's in the disassemble mode. What is the assemble afterwards? He has not told us that. And we are trying to figure that out from 60-member perspective. How do we reassemble it in a mixed priority bag? That's tough. And so I'm just telling you the tools we have at hand and why it looks like the legislature maybe is a little more dysfunctional in that regard. We're from all over Alaska, from the most rural to the most urban, to the most left to the most right, to the richest to the poorest. I mean, it's all in there, right? And actually we've blended pretty decently considering the mix that we get to blend. But the appropriation is the biggest policy call we make in any given year. And so that's the immediate thing. But it also has to look a decade out. And it's hard for us to look past 5 years, I can tell you that. It's hard for anybody to look past 5 years on an economy because we are throttled by a world economy. That's whether it's fish, that's whether it's oil, that's whether it's tourism. We are in a volatile marketplace, and we have to see that marketplace coming at us. Probably the longest we can see is a 5-year increment. But we have to start thinking about what is the next generation get. And so those are the immediate, the midterm, and the long-term issues that we have to deal with. The policy is meant to be long-term. The budget is meant to be that policy call for now and going in. And the midterm is how do we deal with an economy that comes at us at a breakneck speed. So those are the tools we have.
Let's wrap it up then, do it backwards. Start with you, Bob.
Well, I guess I appreciate this roundtable and hearing from folks. I guess moving forward, we have many challenges as been summarized here. I'm happy that I'm part of an interior delegation that works well together. I didn't know it would play out this way back a year ago when I was campaigning and looking forward to my first year in Juneau. As was mentioned, we did struggle to organize and we lost a little bit of time, but we caught up. And I just one last comment about the vote of the people on the PFD. There's a group that's not allowed to vote on that, and that's who I think I represent. That's my 5 grandchildren. Their interests are every bit as important as those folks that are old enough to vote in this state. And the sustainability long-term of the permanent fund is one of my top priorities. And I won't step back from that priority. So that would be my closing comment.
I too thank you all for inviting us and thank my colleagues here for getting me here at 8 in the morning. And sorry, it's a few minutes late. But, you know, there's one thing this governor's done is he's been a great uniter. He's brought a lot of us together that may not have been together on certain issues. And it's kind of a joke, but I'm kind of serious about it. And as you can tell, as you all know, there's a heavy recall campaign going, and in 2 weeks they got a lot of signatures. And I would venture to say a lot of people that have signed are from different political beliefs on other issues. So I think a lot of people come together that normally wouldn't be together on issues of this import. So, you know, I think the legislature, 16 people in the legislature can block an override, which is the lowest threshold or the highest threshold, however you want to look at it, in the country. Right? We're the only state with a 75% threshold to override, and it's being used to its fullest right now. There's 9 people in the Interior Delegation, there's 5 here, there's 4 people that aren't here. I would venture to say that 2/3 of us, 6 out of 9, are probably aligned on most of these kind of PFD type issues. I think 2/3 of the legislature is aligned on about these issues, and I'd venture to say that 2/3 of the public is probably in line with these issues. Again, without polling and voting, it's all subjective at some level, and certainly the meetings we've had has been like 95%, depending on, even in Wasilla, it was 60-40 of people in support of services over a full PFD in the heart of Wasilla at the LIO there. So again, that's not everyone in Wasilla, I know that, but I guess I think we just have to keep doing our jobs and keep firm and as far as votes of the people and all that, the one thing, and I signed on to it, so I better back it up, but the one bill I would support being in the Constitution, and I don't support putting the PFD or anything in the Constitution, but would be the POMP draw, so that we cannot exceed 5.25 or 5%. We can't exceed it. We can go less than that if we want to, but I don't really want to ever exceed that, and if it's in the Constitution, we sure as heck won't. I don't know how likely that is to pass, but that's where I'm at.
Steve?
Like I said at the start, this has been a difficult year. Being in leadership, we sat down with the governor quite a bit through the early parts of the session. We were working on the crime bill, HB 49, was it? Yeah. And we had him in there along with Ben Stevens, who was not the chief of staff at the time. And we sat there and said, okay, here's our bill. What do you think of it? And Ben and him, they said, this is perfect. This will work fine. We said, okay, we want to make sure, because it's a big issue. Will you support this publicly and say that this is a repeal and replacement of SB 91? He said, yes, I will. He said, this is what we need. 2 days later, he come back and shot us down, saying this was terrible, and just really raked us over the coals over it. He did that on 2 different things that we were trying to work with him on, and he came back and shot us in the back after saying that he went along with it. So he kind of lost the credibility with us. And that was through the first part of the session. By the mid-session and moving on into the extended sessions, suddenly we didn't have any contact with him. We sat down when Ben Stevens took over for Tuckerman Babcock, and we're trying to work through to get done. And we said, okay, these things we think will be doable on our side of the coin. How does the governor feel about this? Will this work for him? And Ben would go, well, I'm not sure. I'll have to check with him. Get him on the phone. Oh, he's not available. And that's what we ran into over and over. And we tried to compromise with him, but his compromise was my way or the highway. So I was so disappointed the way that this came down through this especially towards the end. And it's not going to be any better next year. We're going to have a tougher time next year.
I'd just like to finish on your question. John did a great job, but the voices of the people can give us more support to move forward than anything. The people. I'll just give you one example. I had 3,000 emails in this last run.
Yeah.
900 plus from the district, and we answered every one. I had 10 that supported the $3,000 dividend, and the balance to use common sense and use part of the fund earnings if that's what you need. And so the people, your voice has got more power than anything that you can imagine. The last thing I'd like to say is, and I said this at the Republican luncheon the other day, I had met with the administration on a couple of times and asked them, where's the vision for Alaska? And I said this at the luncheon the other day. So I had 6 of my colleagues, and Mike, and you were there as well, and it asked me to go to dinner. And it was 6 senators that supported a full $3,000 dividend. And I listened, and I disagreed, and I said, where's the vision for Alaska? now. I said, if you take a dividend holiday for 3 years at a $3,000 dividend, and you build Susitna Dam at the 600 megawatt capacity, and it penciled 25 years ago, it pencils today. I said, now you have cut the electric rates for a generation for 85% of the population. That's vision. That's putting real money in people's pockets for 100 years, not for 3, 4, 5, or 6 years. I'm done.
And John?
He's right. Every day you get pilots who fly every day, don't crash, truck drivers, nurses, CPAs. Every day they get up and do their job. Hardly anybody pats them on the back except for those who are in their association. We're pretty much out in the open. We get to do for Alaska what is immediate needs and what is the long-term needs. Alaska's geography is not going away. Some people are going to come and go, but I'm here to stay. My grandkids may or may not live here, but the kids that are going to be their age are going to live here. Whether it's a school, and I don't like some of the liberal elements, and I would fight to change them, but I'm not going to disassemble the system. Now, modify the system. So I do tend to look at Alaska as potential. By the way, the feds aren't going away. The federal land ownership in Alaska is not going to change. But what can we do to get them to work with us is going to be our question. It has been for years and needs to be continually before us. The ocean's not going away. Did you know that the people in America expect us to look out for the Pacific Ocean? They expect us to look out for the Arctic. Did you know that Europe loves coming to Alaska? We're kind of a host to the Northern Hemisphere, Pacific, Arctic. They love our mountains. We get to host this wonderful country for the whole stinking world. So we get to love it, live in it, and play in it. And right now we've got some problems. We're going to work our way through these problems. But at the end of the day, I want to build a little bit. When it's my turn to talk to the university students, I use 3 words: produce, reduce, and conserve. If you're not producing something as a society, you're going to be indentured. And we're too doggone close to it now because we have a single source of income, right? We need to work on this. So our fish is good and our tourism is good, but we need to work on those things. But you got to produce something. You can't just not produce. But if you produce something, then you have to reduce your risks. That's your economic, your environmental, you do this as a business. You have to reduce whatever risk you can, and then you have to conserve something. You have to leave something for the next generation. You can't use it all right now, blah, 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 So those 3 words. But as we move forward, that geography on that state up there, we answer to the whole United States for the federal management. Did you know that everybody in the world expects us to manage that when it's really not even in our control? But we get to be the voice. We get to be the voice for the Bering Strait. We get to be the voice for the Canadian border in many ways. So our biggest trading partner is China. Our biggest next in order, I think, is Korea, Japan, Canada, our biggest trading partners. So we have minerals in Alaska. Our potential is just phenomenal. We have assets like you wouldn't believe, but we have to make them work. We have to produce from them. In the legislature, our Constitution needs to be a stable document. That's why we don't put a dividend in the Constitution. It's not a fundamental right. But leading to the next generation, those questions come before us, and it's our responsibility to answer those questions as we look to that future. And then this year's budget, fight like crazy, argue over it, blah, 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 it needs to be with that in view. And so I would encourage you, when you go to work today, at least many of us have a lot of respect for that. And when it's our turn to go into the governance structure, we're looking not only for this year's solutions, we're looking for how that geography can be the best place on the earth.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you coming and spending time with us today. I particularly thank you for your collective vision. I think most of us here share that we're in it together building the state of Alaska. So,
Thanks, Jim, for the invitation.
Thank you.
All right.
running a 102 fever, and the worst pain he's ever been in.
A little awkward.
I don't get too many folks willing.